My name is Adair and I'm 11 years old. Everyone says I'm a bit crazy. I like to pretend I'm a kangaroo sometimes. I live with my mum, who's brilliant and awesome. I live with my brother, who's highly annoying. I live with my dad. He's a good dad.
In the meantime, just to get into the education department, I joined the art class. Once I got into art, it was just some other way of channeling my anger and frustration. Although it was, I wasn't doing any drawings of sort of crazy stuff, painting in black all the time or anything like that. It was just somewhere else to channel what was going on in my mind, or even forget what was going on in my mind. And then I remember just sitting there and thinking that I'd fallen in love with art. But these guys who put me in prison constantly pop into my mind. And in the end, I'm thinking, well, they're getting in the way of me progressing my life. Like, my past is holding me back from going forward. So I set myself a goal that I would give everything on this art course. I'd give everything I could. And if I got a distinction in that, I will go and try and get a degree. I'll become sort of a preacher for the art. I'd be sort of trying to get people into art as well, like a sort of born-again artist,
Relationships are hard enough without throwing, your partner being a sex worker. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't go to work knowing that the thoughts that would be going through. I knew that they would be sitting at home or at work or whatever, and you couldn't not think about it. It's just too hard.
If I do get married, I'd wear not a puffy dress, like a thinnish dress, and she wore a massive train. And I would not want to have a train that big because it's just stupid. I just have a little one. I'd make sure I'd wearing the traditional white, but I wouldn't want to have an hour-long ceremony kind of thing. And then I just party until 1 o'clock in the morning when I just go to sleep.
Hi, those were the voices of someone called Adair, Gary and Sage. And my name's Clare, Patey. I'm an artist and a curator, and I'm currently the director of a project called the Empathy Museum. All of my work that I've done as an artist has been kind of outside of the gallery or the theatre context, and I work in a really participatory way, and I may work in an allotment or on a bridge or in a disused building or in a hospital or a prison or on a rooftop, and I work often with groups of people who aren't artists, so I'll work with scientists or farmers or lumberjacks or surgeons, whatever the project kind of calls for. Empathy is a subject that is at the heart of what we're looking at with this project, obviously. It comes from a German word that I'm going to say wrong if there's any German speakers here, but it's called Einfühlung, which appeared in German philosophy in the kind of end of the 19th century, and it literally means feeling into, and it was used originally to talk about art and nature, but it's then transformed a little bit to talk about a psychological affinity with another. So we talk about it now as meaning an ability to take an imaginative leap to see the world through somebody else's eyes. And that's really the kind of starting point for what we're doing with the Empathy Museum. That can be quite a complex relationship and quite a nuanced relationship, but it's really, I think, about that emotional and imaginative and sometimes even physical journey that makes us recognize that other people have a different set of views or experiences or values and identities to ourselves, and to try and feel into those. So we've been looking at different ways that we could approach that. And just quickly, just to say that empathy is very different from sympathy. I'm sure you're all completely aware of that, but it is the capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing from that person's point of view. So that's why quite a lot of the work that we've done is around dialogue, conversation, and first-person narrative storytelling. And it's kind of important. Oh, I need to work this slide thing. I hope this is going to work. No? Yeah. Lots of people have written about empathy, from Elvis to Barack Obama. Is it this one? Am I doing the right thing here? And in a kind of increasingly divided world, and in a post-Brexit divided Britain, in a world where there's an increase in xenophobia and global conflict and environmental crisis, and an increase in marginalized communities, we're looking at empathy as a tool to understand one another and to break down prejudices. On top of this, it's kind of now widely accepted that through advances in neuroscience that empathy is a skill and that we're wired for empathy and that it's a skill that we can learn much like riding a bike. And there's beginning to be programs in schools that are about teaching young people about learning how to be more empathetic. And that is quite important because it's combating a kind of growing narcissistic, hyper-individualistic, kind of me, selfie culture. And even if we feel like that we are widening our circles because of the internet and because of global communication, we're not, in fact. We're decreasing our social circles and our work circles and our friendship circles and surrounding ourselves more and more with people who uphold our values and don't challenge our assumptions about the world around us. So in a big way, empathy could be about approaching peace in the Middle East, and in a very small way, it could be about getting on better with your partner or a new family who've moved next door to you. So that's kind of where it's all coming from. And what we've done to respond is to try and look at this whole area of empathy is I've worked with a philosopher and writer called Roman Krishnarik, who's written a book called Empathy. And in it, he outlines the traits that you need to have in order to be a highly empathetic person. And that's on the next slide. And so he approached me, and we worked together, and he wanted to turn some of the thinking behind his book into an experiential project, so people could come along and actually do something. So I started to look at the idea of creating this free, accessible museum that was based a bit on the model of a high street, but as an antidote to consumerism. So people would come and have an experience rather than come and buy something. So the whole museum is based around kind of shops that people would recognize the form of. So eventually there'll be a shoe shop, a gym, a travel agent's, an undertaker's, a cafe, a library, and so on, a hairdresser's. But we started with a project called A Mile in My Shoes. Next slide, please. And this came about from the idea of empathy being either people describing it as seeing the world through somebody else's eyes or walking in someone else's shoes. And this is a Native American proverb, never criticize a man till you've walked a mile in his shoes. And I thought, what if we take that proverb, that metaphor, and we make that literal? So we opened a shoe shop. Next slide, please. And we housed it in a shipping container that we converted into look like a massive shoebox. This is in Vauxhall in London, and we've only been going a year, so this is the first project we did, and it was this time last year it was on. And we went out into the local community in Vauxhall, and we collected, with a group of radio producers, audio artists, 30 stories from local people. And the youngest person was 9, the oldest person was 90, and they ranged from a lawyer to a drag queen. And inside, the next slide, please, we asked people for their story and for their shoes. And so we open the shoe shop with the shoes that belong to a stranger. And on the label, all it has is the size of the shoe and the name of the person. So it says, these shoes belong to Helen, for instance. And you come in and you get fitted with a pair of shoes that belong to a stranger, and you take a mile's walk, literally, and you get an MP3 player and some headphones. Next slide, please. And the next one. And you listen to the person's story as you're walking a mile. And it sounds like a really, really simple, well, it is a very simple idea, but it is incredibly powerful because you're taking a journey on your own. I think it's important that it's on your own. You're doing something physical, and you look down and you don't recognize your own feet. You're wearing something else, someone else's shoes, and listening to someone else's voice. And we're going to be doing it outside at lunchtime, so you can all come and have a go. But I take it from me, it's a more profound experience that you might expect from someone explaining it. Can I have the next slide, please? And the stories that we've collected, we've now done it, we've been to Australia and done it, and we've done it in, as part of the London International Festival of Theatre on Greenwich Peninsula. And this afternoon we're going to Yorkshire to do it. But everywhere we go, we collect new shoes and new stories. So we've now got about 100 pairs of shoes and stories in the museum. It's not our only project. We also have a library, and we run human libraries. But I'm talking about this because that's the project that we've brought here today. And they're really from a really diverse range of people, and I guess that the power of it is in the transformative power of storytelling and listening, actually. And the idea that if I'm telling you a story and you're really listening, that there's some sync between our neurological patterns, our brain patterns begin to sync with one another. And that's kind of, I think, what's happening when it's really working well. And it's about our shared humanity. It's about the you and me and the me and you, and how we make those connections that actually, arguably, about the thing that makes us human. Can I have the next slide? Just quickly before I finish, we've now taken the idea of A Mile in My Shoes, and we got asked by the Health Foundation to do a version of it that just looked at stories from across the NHS, across Britain, NHS and social care. So we've worked, again, with a team of audio producers, and we've collected another 40 stories from across the whole of the UK, from patients, from doctors, nurses, paramedics, prison psychologists, the hospital imam, all sorts of different people. And we showed that at the NHS Confederation conference and at the Expo, and we're taking that to Parliament in October so that policymakers are going to be walking in the shoes of the people who deliver the NHS. So that's a kind of slightly different model, but it might be appropriate to talk to this audience about, because it's also very powerful. I think there's one more slide, maybe. Oh yeah, we asked people when they've walked in the shoes what it was like to walk in someone else's shoes and to take a picture of their shoes. And we're developing a kind of online version of that so that you can take a mile walk wherever you are and listen to the stories on online, on a podcast. So I hope that you will all be able to come and experience it outside at lunchtime and take a mile walk in someone else's shoes. Thank you very much.